the Winnipeg Jets, they have some players who are not at 100%. To talk to us about it is going to be Scott Billeck from the Winnipeg Sun. Good evening, my friend. How are you?
Hey, how are you guys doing? Is this sacrilege to wear this hat on your show?
You could we talk Canadians hockey here, but we don't have a problem with a Boston Red Sox cap. We don't have a problem with that.
Right,
it would probably sting a little bit more if it was Washington, who of course when the Expos left, they relocated to Washington. That would probably sting a little bit more, but some would probably even like that too, because Washington is the new favorite team for a lot of Montrealers who used to love the Expos. Hey, we just talked about the health or lack thereof of the Winnipeg Jets. What's going on from a health perspective? Because it seems like there's 5 or 6 players who are not at 100%.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously Nikolai Ehlers and Logan Stanley both on IR with their respective injuries. So that's well, at least in Nikolai Ehlers' case, that's a big loss for the Jets. But they've been dealing that with them since Game 2 of the season. So that's something they've been dealing with. But right now, Mason Appleton, top line guy who has replaced Nikolai Ehlers, has some sort of illness. So I'm not entirely sure what it is or if he's going to be able to play tomorrow. But Morgan Barron won't play tomorrow. He's got an upper body injury. They're not entirely sure exactly how they want to kind of go about that injury, how to kind of deal with it. He had been playing through it. It's been kind of a lingering thing. So they're not sure kind of if they need to sit him for too long or what they want to do with that. So, and then Pierre-Luc Dubois, who probably gets the chat going here. He didn't practice today. Blake Wheeler didn't practice. And Josh Morrissey, and they were labeled as maintenance day. Josh Morrissey, I can definitely see that he got banged up pretty good in Vegas in the 2-1 loss in overtime on Sunday. But I expect Wheeler and Dubois to play. Morrissey could be a bit of a question mark, and Appleton's a question mark as well, just because they don't want him in the locker room if he's still sick. And then from there, obviously losing Morgan Barron, it kind of throws a bit of a wrench into their third line, which they made an emergency recall today for a guy named Jansen Harkins, who can kind of fill in that role, but he's not the same level as Morgan Barron, obviously. So
Rick Bowness was out due to COVID. Is he going to be behind the Winnipeg Jets bench tomorrow night?
Yeah, he will be. So So what a year for Rick Bowness. Gets COVID right before. On the afternoon of Winnipeg's home opener. It's almost 3 weeks ago now. Misses that game, their first road trip, comes back, coaches behind the bench for the Toronto Maple Leafs on Hockey Night in Canada. And then he's out again after that. Nearly fell over at the podium here in Winnipeg on the day that he came back. So he had a bit of a struggle. Wasn't on the last road trip with the Jets. And returned this week onto the practice ice. So it's been it's been a wild year for Rick Bowness. Hasn't really coached the team a whole lot during the regular season, of course. These are his first couple of practices that he's done two now, because he kind of just got back. But he's better now. He doesn't look very ill like he did when he tried to come back the first time. This time he's back, and he'll be back behind the bench tomorrow night.
How good or not is the depth on this Jets team? Because we know that on the top 2 lines, Scheifele with Wheeler on his right, Perfetti on his left. You got Pierre-Luc Dubois, who's got Kyle Connor on his left. He's got Mason Appleton on his right. If Nick Ehlers is in the lineup, like you said, he's in for Mason Hamilton. That's a big top 6. So now I got to ask you about, the bottom 6. Appleton would probably be down. You got Lowry, you got Gagne. How's the bottom 6 on this team?
Yeah, it's been good. For the first time in a long time in the city, you can actually say that you would actually like the bottom 6 of this team. You have a fourth line that actually plays, which is something that a lot of coaches will tell you. You need 4 lines in this league to win. The Jets haven't really had that in the last few years. And now they have Sam. Well, Sam Gagne was playing on it. I mean, with the injuries, but ideally they would have. A guy named Saku Manalainen, who is a big Finnish kid. They have David Gustafsson, who's somebody they drafted a couple years ago in the second round, and they also have they've had Sam Gagne on that line as well. And that's been a bit of a boon for them. Sam Gagne's got 3 goals on the year for them, including 1 game winner. And that's the kind of line they've leaned on that line quite a bit, especially with a couple back-to-backs. Early on in the season, they've had that going, so that's been good. And the third line with Adam Lowry, so they had to, obviously Andrew Kopp's gone from this town. They've lost a few guys, but Mason Appleton's been back after they claimed, or they traded for him last year in Seattle. So that's been good. And then Morgan Barron, who they got in the Andrew Kopp trade with the Rangers last year. They already had him pegged in third line even before camp started, and he started off the camp injured. But Morgan Barron's been very good for this Jets team. And so, what I'm trying to say is, like, they've done a really good job this year of building a bottom six that they can actually depend on, that you can actually go out and send those lines out. They've played that fourth line late in the third period. At times, they trust that line here to do the job of shutting down other teams, and they've also trusted it to find some offense when the Jets can. They were the best line against the Vegas Golden Knights. The Jets got wildly outplayed by the Vegas Golden Knights. You never want to say your fourth line is your best line, but they have shown at least that they can hang with some of the big top lines in the league. And that's not something you've really ever been able to say in Winnipeg. It's been a long time since the Jets have had, probably since the days of Matthew Perreault and him dropping down to those lines and that sort of thing. But it's been a while, and this is now a team that actually does have some depth outside of those two big lines up front.
The first unit on the power play, they use for the most part 4 forwards on the defenseman, right? With Josh Morrissey being that lone defenseman.
Yeah, and so they've been doing that. Sometimes they'll cycle Neil Pionk in there, but they like to keep him with Nate Schmidt on the second power play unit. So yeah, the problem with that too is this power play was really good when Nikolai Ehlers was healthy. Yeah. And it hasn't been so good since Nikolai Ehlers has been out. And part of that is they reverted to last year's kind of power play with Blake Wheeler. And, no fault of Blake Wheeler, just father time catches up to you. But it's a very stagnant power play with Blake Wheeler. It doesn't move. There's not a lot of motion. So they haven't really gotten a lot of good looks, haven't got a lot of good chances lately. With Nikolai Ehlers, they were moving. That was a very, I think Colorado Avalanche or Tampa Bay Lightning, like that type of motion, between the seams, up the blue line. There was a lot. It was quick. It was fluid. It moved really well. With Ehlers out, it struggled, and then that's been part of the problem on the power plays. They haven't been able to get a lot of goals. The other thing too is,
Ehlers a guy who scored. Ehlers a guy who scored 11 more goals than Blake Wheeler last year, right? And like you said, Blake Wheeler now is getting up there. I mean, he's 36 years old.
Yep.
And obviously Ehlers is pretty much in the prime of his career, but unfortunately for him, he's there's been a couple of seasons now, last 3 seasons, I believe, or 4 seasons where he's ran into some injury trouble.
Yeah, that's his. I think the last time he played 80 plus games was 2017-18.
You would
was
be
the
correct.
last time.
Yes.
Yeah,
so that's
last time he did that. And I think last year he missed 20. The year before that, I mean, they were shortened seasons for the last 2. So, but he's definitely missed a good chunk of time in the last, as you said, in the last 3 or 4 years. And that's been a problem. And I think it's also so this is the first year that they put Nikolai Ehlers on the top line and the top power play. That's a big thing that the coaching change here did in the offseason, was really put their trust in Ehlers. Rick Bowness has raved about his playmaking abilities, his speed, all that kind of stuff. But now he's out. I mean, he was showing that. I mean, that line was good. The top line of Connor, Scheifele, and Ehlers is a pretty formidable line in the NHL. But without Ehlers, they miss a little bit of that playmaking ability, that zone entry ability. And the same thing on the power play. I mean, they were playing Scheifele, Connor, and Ehlers on the power play as well. And that was another part, thing that was helping that line, that they were creating chemistry 5-on-5 and 5-on-4. Now it's back to Blake Wheeler on the power play. And it runs differently, and they haven't really figured out a way to change it up. I mean, I honestly, I think they should just put Cole Perfetti on the power play and take Blake Wheeler off of it, because at least it offers something different, a different look, and a guy who is a little bit more creative. I mean, Blake is still a world-class passer, but he kind of just sits in one spot for a lot of the time, and it just doesn't. It's not enough. It's not enough to get this power play going, and you can see it just based on their numbers recently.
I got to tell you something. I think David Rittich is a better goaltender than what we've seen thus far at the National Hockey League level. He and Hellebuck could be quite a duo. I could be wrong on my scouting report on Rittich, by the way, but I think he's better than what we've seen.
Yeah, it's interesting. He's been put in a couple back-to-back, so, you're not getting the best effort out of the guys in front of him, just based on fatigue and that sort of thing. I thought he's been all right. I mean, he hasn't been 2019, 20, the first half of the year where he was an NHL All-Star. He's probably been a little more close to, well, he hasn't been as bad as he was in the back half of that season either. But he just kind of exists. I think this team kind of it misses Eric Comrie a little bit. Yeah, I mean, you guys might know a little bit more, just what he's doing in Buffalo there, Eric. The way that he's been playing. Riddick's been all right. It's serviceable. I mean, he's only had to play twice here to start the year. And then Connor Hellebuck, based on the Jets month, this month is going to play probably all of the games just because they're so spread out. There is a back-to-back in middle of the month, Calgary and Seattle. So Riddick will probably get one of those games. They could be good. I just don't know if they're winning the Jennings good. I'm trying to do both there. But I mean, the way that Connor Hellebuck's played to start the year, I mean, here you go again. I mean, this is there's a reason why people around here call him Vezina Buck, and he's been very good to start the year. And so this is the thing. I mean, are the Jets going to be able to ride his wave as they did in the 1920 season, and he drags them to the playoffs like he did? Or are they going to figure out how to play better in front of him so that he doesn't see 50 shots a night like he did essentially in Vegas? I think it was 47 or 48 by the end of the night there. They need, and you guys would know in Montreal, I mean, a good goalie is a good goalie, but you do need a good backup at times too. I mean, there's only so much that Carey Price could do at times. You don't want to play the guy 70 games a year because it just tires him out for the playoffs if you get there. I'm just not sold on Dave Riddick yet. I get what you're saying. I'm just not entirely sure that's. I wasn't sold on it when they got him. I think they should have made a better effort of re-signing Eric Comrie. But again, David Riddick, he can surprise, and I think he's motivated still. I think he still wants to be that 1B, maybe even a starter in the NHL. How realistic that is, I'm not entirely sure, but at the same time, I think there's still the motivation there for Riddick. It's just he might be getting the short end of the stick sometimes in terms of the starts that he's gotten so far. But I think you want to just at the end of the day, you want to see him make a couple more saves.
In conversation with, actually, I've been told I don't have to do this. I used to do this for 20 years on radio, but seeing as everyone knows that you're actually on, Scott, I don't have to actually reset and tell everyone who you are. Okay. So everyone knows who he is. He's Scott Billeck there. I just did it again.
There you go.
Talk to me about Connor Hellebuck. If I mentioned best goaltender in the National Hockey League, where do you have Connor Hellebuck? Oh,
he's up there, right? I mean, you got to look at your Shesterkins, and he hasn't had the best start to the year. Igor there, but the Vasilevskis. Yeah, the two different types of goalies, Vasilevsky and Connor Hellebuck. Vasilevsky is obviously a very exciting goalie to watch and being very good. Connor Hellebuck can be a bit, they call him big and boring, right? But he gets the job done. But at the end of the day, if you look at, you can look at his save percentage now, or you can look at his goals saved above average and all that kind of stuff, all the analytics. Connor Hellebuck is back to being the dialed-in goaltender that a lot of people, had become accustomed to watching him play. The thing with him over the last couple of years is, I mean, in 1920, before the COVID, he dragged them into that playoffs. The year after that, he was, essentially the guy who dragged them right into that series against Montreal. And then at that point, the Jets just couldn't overcome the physicality. But it wasn't due to goaltending in that. And then last year, I mean, he was on an island. Connor Hellebuck has often been on an island here in Winnipeg. One of the things that they've really mismanaged, in my opinion, at times is, putting a world-class kind of defense in front of him and getting it going. So, but yeah, I mean, the one thing about Connor Hellebuck is the guy's extremely driven, extremely motivated. I mean, one of the things coming into this year, I think not making the playoffs last year actually probably helped Connor Hellebuck in the long run. He actually got to take some time off, rest. Obviously everybody knows how crappy the last couple of years have been in terms of just how compact it's been, the schedules,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. But I think that helped Connor Hellebuyck just take some time to reset a little bit, and he talked about that a little bit himself.
Yeah.
And he's back. I mean, here's a guy that's got a .930 save percentage right now. I mean, what else could you ask for from the guy? I mean, he's been that good. The problem is they just need to not need him to be that good every night. You got
Yeah.
to get this guy some rest, and he doesn't need to be shelled every single night he's on the ice.
Yeah, for me, one of the top 3 goalies in the National Hockey League,
Sure.
along with Vasilevsky and Shesterkin. But obviously, everyone's going to have their personal taste. This whole thing between Scheifele and Jake Evans, which obviously happened a couple of years ago
You guys
in
are
the
still
playoffs.
talking about that?
Well, I'm wondering if you guys are talking about. Do you think it's over, this whole Scheifele
Wow.
Evans thing, or do you think actually tomorrow somebody might go whisper something to Mark Scheifele?
I mean, why didn't it happen last year? I guess is kind of maybe, like, where was it last year too? Like, maybe I don't know. I mean, I understand these things can kind of carry on, and grudges can be held and stuff. I know for Mark Scheifele, I mean, he would rather forget it. To Mark Scheifele, I mean, and there'll be fans and people listening.
Of
in
course,
here
he'd rather forget it. It's one of the reasons why they got swept in the series.
Right, exactly. But
Because he put
more than
himself
that,
ahead of the team.
right. But I think a lot of people would probably agree too that Mark Scheifele's not that type of player either. I mean, if you look, he's got a pretty pristine kind of track record otherwise. It was a very bad decision he made, and it one that, we were. So this came up, and I'm just going to go on a little bit here if I have some time. But so when
all the time in the world. Go ahead.
So when Mark Scheifele in Vegas, he's up against Jack Eichel. Jack Eichel ends up scoring the game winner.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that got talked about around here was, why didn't Mark Scheifele just essentially, take out, not Bobby Clark, Jack Eichel's ankles, but, something along the lines of just trip him or whatever to stop him. There's like 3 or 4 seconds left in overtime. By the time, I mean, you take a penalty, what does it really matter at that point?
Mm-hmm.
You probably make it to the shootout. Some people question, well, does the Jake Evans hit still kind of linger in his mind? Does he not want to is he scared of doing something like that again, where that doesn't even have to be like just full blown charging a guy from the blue line, but anything, right? Anything that would potentially injure a guy. I don't really see it that way. Like, I don't think that Mark Scheifele is really, he's not thinking about it anymore. I don't know. I mean, you can tell me if your guys are there or still thinking about it. I don't
not
think
something
it's
that's being discussed in Montreal.
Yeah,
what we do know is the Canadiens swept the Winnipeg Jets a couple of years
well,
ago.
and I think that's the answer, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that was the answer to that. And I think in the first game that they played, and I can't even remember if anybody really ever went after Mark. So it was one of those things where, yeah, I don't know. It doesn't seem like, maybe it is. I mean, I just don't know if some of the guys there that would still do something about it are still interested in, paying Mark back for that. Again, like I said, I think, sweeping the Jets out of the playoffs because Mark Scheifele wasn't in the lineup was probably the worst thing that you could do to a hockey nerd like Mark Scheifele. And so, I mean, at the end of the day, if somebody's going to do something, they'll do something. But I don't think it's a big deal here anymore, if at all.
What do you expect to see tomorrow night between the Canadiens and the Jets?
Oh, well, I mean, I think it'll be a good game because, here's the thing. I think the Jets are going to be motivated to come out for Rick Bowness' second game of the year, which is interesting to say. But to come out and play the way Rick Bowness was not happy with how the Jets played. They took 5 or 6 points on this road trip, and Rick Bowness basically tore a strip off of them with the way that they played. And if you watch the games, especially in LA and obviously in Vegas, I mean, the Jets didn't deserve to win either of those games, and could have probably came away from this trip with 1 point, really, if a couple bounces went a different way. So I think that's one of the things that, I'm interested to see. Like, the Jets could turn back into the team that just crushed the St. Louis Blues a week ago, last Monday. That's not good news for the Montreal Canadiens, if that's the case. But it's also a team that could come out and get absolutely shelled by the Canadiens and lose, 5-1. And that's the problem with the Jets right now. They're kind of stuck between 2 different systems. The old Paul Maurice system, where it's just kind of whatever. Yeah, a little bit of that. And then they're trying to figure out this Rick Bowness Dallas Stars system. That kind of, defensive-minded, really defensive-minded kind of system where everything starts from, the inside your own blue line. That's not something the Jets. But here's the thing: like when the Jets were down on the road trip, they reverted really a lot to that old type of way of thinking, and it was just like, okay, well, let's try and get our stars to like outscore our problems tonight. And that didn't obviously happen. At least in Vegas, it didn't happen. So I'm expecting a Jets team to be a little more within their structure, and one that's motivated to kind of stay in there. But anything can happen. You're going to get Hellebuck tomorrow night, so that's not a good sign either. But again, this is one
I
of those
don't know. The
games that
Canadians
could go
do
either
well
way.
against Hellebuck. The Canadians
That's
do well
true.
against
That's
Hellebuck.
true.
Yeah.
That's true. Hellebuck's a different animal this year, but yes, it could go either way, and that's the thing with the Jets right now. That's where they're at. I mean, this is a team that either could lose 5-1 or they could win 5-1. And, it'll be one because they either stick with their structure or one because they get away with it and, mistakes just start to compound themselves and everything snowballs downhill. And the Jets kind of pick up a loss.
So if they're a team that will either win 5-1 or lose 5-1, I know that tomorrow with an over-under of 6.5, I should go under. So thank you for the tip. I appreciate it.
I'm not a betting man, but I'll let you. Yeah, you do what you gotta do.
You know what? I used to be a betting man. I had some money in the account, and I actually took the Canadians to beat the Winnipeg Jets in preseason of all things, because I think the Canadians had lost their first 4 or 5 preseason games. They played the Jets in Montreal, and the Jets had nobody. The only guy they had that night was Pierre-Luc Dubois.
Yeah.
So I took the Canadians, and the Jets tied up the game, I think, with 2.5 minutes left, and scored the game-winning goal with like less than 30 seconds left in the game. And I was not a happy camper when I went to bed that night. But anyway, enjoy the hockey game tomorrow night, bud.
Yeah, you too. Appreciate it.
Thanks for doing this, man. I really appreciate it. All right, there you have it. Scott Billeck from the Winnipeg Sun. I'm Marinaro, and that clip you just watched is from our most recent episode of the Sick Podcast. Once again, follow us on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's absolutely free, and you'll be notified when we go live. I'm Marinaro. Tell your friends about it. This podcast, like me, is pretty sick.